Hey there. So this is the session put aside for Friday, the 14th of August, 2026. And if you've been following me for a while, you'll know that each day I'm looking at exact aspects between one planet and another, or exact aspects between the moon and a particular planet. And with those, I'm looking at the main aspects, the Ptolemaic aspects, which are conjunctions, sextiles, trines, squares, and oppositions. So there's 5 main aspects. Now, just so happens on Friday the 14th, there's nothing significant. There's nothing to report that hasn't already come in an exact way, or isn't about to come in, in the following few days. And so I'm left with a blank space. And to me, this is epitomizing a different kind of astrology. You see, all of these aspects I'm talking about are made by knowing the position of the planets across the ecliptic. And this is the ecliptic belt that starts at 0 Aries, goes all the way through the 12 constellations, they're the ones that we've recognized, right the way through to Pisces and back into Aries. So it's like this never-ending story, this never-ending belt. And each of these planets have been identified in a particular direction, a degree. Each of these signs have 30 degrees in. And so actually what we're looking at here with these measurements are the longitudinal positions of our planets across the ecliptic. However, planets don't just move one way. And sure, you might say, okay, yeah, I know about retrogrades. So yeah, like right now we've got Saturn and Neptune, both retrograde. So they're not moving forwards through the zodiac. They're appearing to move backwards. But again, there's more ranges of movements. And so what I want to do today is talk about out of bounds planets, what they are and what that is measuring, and then consider our big out of bounder at the moment, which is Pluto. I mentioned him a little bit, I think, on Sunday's edition, or in Sunday's edition. In the last week, I've mentioned about Pluto going out of bounds. It's a new one. It's not something we've experienced, not since the 1950s. And we're experiencing it in a completely different way. And we haven't experienced that since the late 1800s. So we're into a really new pattern. So I want to talk about that. And at the end, I'm also going to invite you to look at your out of bounds planets and to consider what that might mean for you too. I'm going to be referring to out of bounds planets. Before we get going, I want to say this is a really good article here. I'm going to put the address in the description. It's from psycheastro.com. And Psycheastro has reminded me of the really great childhood book called Where the Wild Things Are. I've actually got this at home because it's one of those stories, where kids come into this sort of unboundaried, unchecked kind of energy, this energy where we can get wild. And actually that really talks to the out of boundness of planets. So let's have a look now. So this is obviously not to scale. This is literally just a diagram to describe how our solar system works. I've put in a little space here to represent Chiron. Chiron goes in between Saturn and Uranus. Again, it's not accurate, and it's teeny tiny in comparison to the others. So we've got the sun, and I want you to imagine just for a minute that the sun is like the teacher in the classroom, and these are all the kids, and they've all got their different personalities. Each of these planets represents a different personality or a different function. For instance, Jupiter is our function to do with optimism and hope and belief systems. Mars is our function to do with standing up and defending. Venus is our function for loving and connecting. And so everything has got its function. And when this us in the middle, Earth, and when we're considering the sun, and in fact, my husband and I do this when we go out. If our kids are in the park and we're chatting, we're always keeping a visual on the kids. And so I often say, have you got a visual? And he's like, yeah, I've got a visual. And I think other families do it. I'm sure they do. You're letting your kids learn about life, move a bit further away from you, but you have to have eye contact. You have to have a visual. And so if we imagine that there is this classroom, or maybe a field trip, and the sun is here, the sun is at the head, the sun is ruling this whole group. The sun wants to have a visual of all of these planets so that the sun knows that everything is aligned, everything is under control. But let's say that Venus is moving up or down. When one of these planets gets up beyond 23 degrees 26 or down beyond 23 26, so it's either northbound or southbound, then we consider that that planet is out of bounds. It's harder for the sun to spot that planet. Moreover, it's harder for the sun to influence that planet. And so we're talking about out of bounds. And so in effect, as we're looking at the ephemeris all the time to be able to draw up our charts, not only is the relative position, the longitudinal position of each planet marked against the ecliptic, but it's also marked according to its height. And most planets have an up and a down kind of sine wave movement. They're all doing their own little movements. And so, you know, astrologers can absolutely monitor the declination, that's what it's called, and that's the latitudinal position of the planet. So we might say Mercury is at 3 degrees in the sign of Libra at a declination of 0.1 north, you know, and it's not too dissimilar to how we find out our location on Earth. So I went to a wedding recently, they sent me a pin and that gave me the longitude and latitude of where the wedding was. And it's the same with the planets. It's just that when we're talking on our astrology channels, we're talking predominantly about the longitude across the ecliptic, you know, which sign is the planet in. However, they also go up, they also go down. So that's the first thing you need to know. The next thing you need to know is Neptune doesn't appear to do that. Sure, Neptune goes up and down, up and down, up and down. But in our whole lifetime, Neptune has not gone out of bounds and is unlikely to. So we can cross Neptune out. We're not going to pay attention to Neptune. And so what happens is sometimes these planets just go beyond that line and then they're known as being out of bounds. So that's what declinations are. But let's have a look now at how you can see them and know that they're there. And for that, I always recommend using astro.com. So this is the chart for today on astro.com. And when you have a look on astro.com, there's this box here called PDF additional tables. If you click that, that's going to get you the information. Because like if you look here, this is all longitudinal. These are all the current positions. And you can see the longitudinal positions of all of the planets, but nothing about the declination, like how high or low are they. So if you click additional tables, and when you've clicked additional tables, it brings up this lovely little PDF. And again, you've got the longitudes here, the positions of all the planets. Then at the far end of this table, you've got a column called declination. And you'll see that all the declinations have got a north, an N, or a S for south. So it tells you how high up the sun, the moon, Mercury, Venus are in relationship to the midpoint, you know, where it's 0. And you can go through all of your planets and you also see the nodes have a position as well, and Chiron. If you had any asteroids that you were looking at, they would come into this table as well. So you can see here that there are 2 that are highlighted in red, and these are above 23, 26, indicating that they are out of bounds. So in this particular one, we've got Mars out of bounds at 23 degrees 41 north. We've also got Pluto out of bounds at 23, 27 south. So this is where we are on the slide. So again, this is the chart for Friday the 14th. Pluto is out of bounds south and Mars is out of bounds north. Now, in the same way as when we're looking longitudinally at the planets to see if they're in aspect with each other, like I guess with aspects, we're looking at how does this planet, planet A, relate to this planet, planet B. There's a similar thing with declinations. And so we have what's known as parallel planets and contra-parallel planets. And here, the degree difference is just 1. That's what I would recommend. And so contra-parallel, we've got 3 examples of. In fact, Mars and Pluto are an example of it, where they're both at the same degree, but on opposite sides, one south and the other's north. So you can see, 3 clear examples of this. So both Mars and Pluto are at 23 degrees of the respective directions. That means they are working in a contra-parallel way. For contra-parallel, think opposition. They are working in an oppositional way. We've also got Venus and Saturn working in a contra-parallel. Venus is at 3 south and Saturn is at 3 north. They have got an oppositional energy right now. And then we've also got the North Node and Chiron also working. They're both at 11 degrees, one south, the other's north. Now, if we had parallel planets, and we don't actually have any examples here, they would be 23, 23, both north or both south. They would, here with the Chiron and the North Node, they would both be north or both be south at 11 degrees. And if you've got parallel planets, you can read them as conjunctions. They really work beautifully together. So you might say, how does this planet and this planet fuse together to create something? Whereas with a contra-parallel, you would be saying, how is planet A and planet B working against each other? So it's kind of fascinating. And then I think there's a lot of strength when you see repeating patterns. And so I've identified a repeating pattern right now because in the longitudinal chart, we've got the North Node and Chiron working together. They're working together in a sextile, showing that right now there's a very strong healing vibe going on. And the sextile between the North Node and Chiron don't happen very often. They're pretty rare, actually. So it's unusual, but they're working together. And then interestingly, at a declination level, they're working against each other. So, to me, what is really observed is the fact that the North Node, which is about our karma, our fate, our direction, the things we are challenged by, and then the energy of Chiron to do with healing, and I would say self-acceptance, because obviously when everything heals, and we don't feel quite so vulnerable, we can come into full acceptance of ourselves. And so it's like, there's something really big going on with the journey of self-acceptance and healing everything that takes us from self-acceptance. And so it's a big theme, whether you're looking longitudinally or latitudinally within the charts. And so I think it's fascinating to do that. So back to the subject then of outer bounds. Right now we've got Pluto out of bounds. And here's a table, which actually I got from astro.com. Again, the same website that you can go to get these charts. And this is a really good article on astro.com specifically about Pluto out of bounds. And you can see that right now Pluto is out of bounds. It started on the 12th of August and it's going to be out of bounds for 120 days. So it ends in December. Then it's going to go out of bounds again in 2027, again ending in December. And there's this similar pattern for the next 10 years. Now, when Pluto's out of bounds, and in fact, this article talks about it, it's Roseanne Finn that's mentioned it. This is a time when we are coming back into our own power, when we're rewriting the rules, we're reclaiming. I mentioned this earlier in a different episode. But we can see here some of the different patterns that we've experienced. So for instance, there was an out of bounds south, which is what's going on right now in the 1200s. I don't actually know enough about history to be able to talk with any authority about that. Then the previous time it was out of bounds south, like it is now, was between 1775 and 1796. So it's in a revolution era, with the American Revolution, the French Revolution, the Haiti Revolution. It's pretty big. Then the previous time it was out of bounds, it was north, and that was between 1938 and 1953, a time when power, I believe, was consolidated. And of course, now we're in the new era of Pluto out of bounds south. And it's not going to be out of bounds for a few thousand years after this. So this is actually pretty big news. Going back to our current picture, you can see Pluto's out of bounds, and like I said, Pluto out of bounds south is known about us reclaiming our power. But what does that mean for Mars? What happens when Mars goes out of bounds? Mars is also out of bounds right now. It's interesting because both Mars and Pluto are the two rulers of Scorpio. So anyone that's got a big Scorpio is likely to be going through life-changing events right now, I would say. For both of them to be out of bounds at the same time, that's your two rulers. So if you've got Scorpio ascendant like me, or Scorpio sun or Scorpio moon, I really imagine you'll be feeling this. They're working against each other, and they're also working in a crazy way. But Mars is about our need to defend ourselves. Mars is our survival. And of course, when we think about survival, we might be thinking about our physical body, but it could also be our ego's survival, and we might draw lines and say, this is my boundary, don't go beyond it. But if Mars is out of bounds, what do you think is happening? Often we learn to toe the line. We learn how to express ourselves without going crazy, without completely losing our shit. When Mars is out of bounds, this is a time when we're more likely to be pushed over the edge, when we're more likely to make a big deal about things. And it's that kind of wildly passionate anger. It could be both Mars and Pluto are also sexual planets. So you could find that sexuality gets really wild during this time. You might find that your will to do things, like Mars is an action taker. So you might find that you're really ready to take action that maybe you've prevented yourself from taking before. Maybe you're about to make a big step forwards for something that you've been thinking, oh, I don't want to do that because it's a big step. It's really wild. So I think Mars out of bounds is likely to bring you into a lot of courage and heartedness, like when somebody really lives from the heart, they kind of throw caution to the wind. And so I do think if you're really ruled by Mars or ruled by Pluto, or they're big in your charts, you'll really notice this energy right now. And then with Pluto out of bounds, in particular, South out of bounds, which has been looked at, by Rosie Finn. This is talking about us reclaiming our power. So maybe we're reclaiming our power and at the same time standing strong against anyone that's going to hold us in place. So as you can see, keeping an eye on this could be really, really important. But these guys working against each other, it's a very warlike situation. My last consideration is, if you have looked at yours now, you might be thinking, well, what about my out of bounds planets? What are they meaning? So let's have a quick look now. Like if the moon's out of bounds, the moon is about our psyche. It's about our emotions. It's about how we instinctively know things. The moon is a really helpful guide to us. It gives us our intuition. If your moon is out of bounds, you might find you're hypersensitive, that you get so upset that people can't console you. You suspect things. That you trust your instincts so much more than other people. Maybe you see things ahead of time, which could, by default, actually make you a bit mad or seem mad. Everyone else is like, oh, there she goes again. Oh, yeah. She sees something we don't see. And then before you know, it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. But if you've got your moon out of bounds, you'll probably be really moved by eclipses and the full moons and new moons. That's worth looking at, right? If you've got Mercury out of bounds, I've got Mercury out of bounds. It's like, when do you stop thinking? When do you stop talking? Like your mind is always working 10 to the dozen. You might, depending on where your Mercury is, like the sign it's in, and whether it's in a parallel or a contra-parallel will probably also affect it. But if Mercury is out of bounds, it's like, when does your thinking stop? Like, when can you be at peace with your thinking? When can you keep still? It's almost like being fidgeting all day long. And going back to the classroom analogy of the sun being the teacher, watching all the kids, the kids that fidget and the kids that need to move, that can't sit still, they're the ones that get the diagnosis of ADHD, which again is kind of Mercury out of bounds. Again, that's not saying that's how you diagnose people. I'm definitely not saying that. But, this is where the thinking function and the movement function don't want to be monitored by the sun. You want to express yourself. Venus out of bounds then. Well, I think, with Venus, most of us can love very, very deeply, but we also know what our limits are to love, the terrestrial, earthly love. And yet, Venus out of bounds, I've also got this. This could be the lengths we'll go to fall in love, stay in love, keep the love. I wonder, in my own life, I know I've been kind of wild with my Venus. I've gone on big trips because I felt like this emotional pull, or this true strong love that came out of nowhere. My loves have been kind of unusual. When I met my husband, we just stayed on the date. We didn't end the date. That's kind of Venus out of bounds, I would say. Mars out of bounds we've covered. So you can go through all of the different planets and see how they are reasonably, and then say, well, what would Jupiter do if he was being wild? And this is, I think, where you might have somebody who's a huge party person, who absolutely lives for the moment, somebody who's got this very wild personality, big personality. Could also be somebody who takes faith and belief systems and takes it into a whole new context. Remember, Jupiter was one of the rarest out of bounds. So you might actually find spiritual leaders with this Jupiter out of bounds. It's like taking it out of the realms of reality and what's normal, what's normally experienced. When I looked at these within my membership group, one thing really stood out, and that was I had Ceres highlighted in all the charts, and Ceres came out of bounds for quite a few of us. And they were the ones who were people who worked with the environment, who worked with natural cycles, who worked with sensitive areas, with all levels of human experience, like birth, death, nurturing, nourishment, all very much Ceres themes. Now, to me, none of them were wild, but they're very passionate at the natural order. But what occurred to me is, Ceres is very much a family planet. It shows what you do within your family matrix. But these women with out of bounds Ceres, they were taking their motherly energy out of their family. So they were mothering the ecology. They were mothering, like, doulas, death doulas, working with people at a much bigger scale with that motherly energy. So I really think, for what it's worth, it's a great tool to look at. See if you've got any out of bounds planets. See if you've got contra-parallels or parallels or repeated patterns. It's going to tell you a hell of a lot about yourself. So to go back to the beginning then, where I said, yes, this is a very quiet day. There's nothing going on. Underneath that, there's always another layer. There's always something else that we can get some meaning from. So I hope that was interesting. I hope it's opened your mind to other possibilities. And I'm wishing you a great Friday. Lots of love to you. Bye for now.